Welcome to Kingdom Now, the podcast featuring faith with an edge, as we celebrate the kingdom of God within you. I'm your host, Dr. Leanne Marino, apostle, author, and theologian, and founder of Spitfire Apostolic Ministries and all the works that go along with it. I'm excited to share this program with you as we explore the ins and outs of counterculture Christianity present as you live out the kingdom of God in your everyday life. Want to learn more? Visit my website at kingdompowernow.org. And now, our program, which features a variety of formats here just for you. Interviews, teaching and preaching proclaimed everywhere from my North Carolina studio to Sanctuary and beyond. And powerful insights here for now as we turn the world upside down everywhere we go. Good afternoon, good evening, happy whatever time of day it is, wherever you are. And to our listeners in Italy, we say buongiorno. We hope that whatever time of day it is when you are listening, that you are having a good one. And I welcome you to this edition of the Kingdom Now podcast. And I am your host, Apostle Dr. Leanne Marino, here as the Spitfire, serving as the voice of counterculture Christianity, where we feature the theme of faith with an edge. And if you'd like to learn more about the world of counterculture Christianity, feel free to visit my website at kingdompowernow.org. I have said for a long time that there are conversations that the church needs to have. In fact, that's why we have Kingdom Now to begin with, because we do need to recognize the relevance of the kingdom living and working active within, around, and among us. And the essential fact is that church today is very diverse and represents a lot more than I think we often think. Sometimes we sit back and it's common to assume that church often tends to be larger than cities we grew up in, or megachurch, or people holding coffee wearing skinny jeans. But the reality is that church is much bigger and more diverse than what we often may assume or relate it to be. And so I have with me today Reverend Alex Birchnell, who is a leader at Christ Redemption Church in Tennessee. And Reverend Birchnell, we're very happy to have you here with us today, and please tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
I am in East Tennessee. We are through Christ Redemption Church. That's CHRIST''S, possessive. And I'm the senior pastor there. I also have an associate pastor. His name's Curtis Walsh. He's not able to join us today. And then we also have an armor bearer who's actually my husband. He's on the pastoral staff as support for the pastors in prayer. Also sometimes bodyguard, because we are we're specifically created for the LGBTQ plus community here in the Tri-City area. So that includes Kingsport, Johnson City, Elizabethton, and the surrounding areas. And we created it because even though there are affirming churches in the area, sometimes they weren't specific to the needs of the queer community. Our community tended to be overlooked, and so we came together, me and my associate pastor and husband, and said, you know what? We feel this call. And it started as just an online ministry, and it grew, and now we have our small little church that we meet every Saturday. We are Sabbath keepers, so we meet every Saturday, and we kind of create more of like a house church kind of environment. We do more biblical studies. We do have music. We do have worship time, but it is a very intimate setting so that we can each feel like we're connecting with each other. We can freely ask questions and be okay not to always have the answer, and enjoy the progress or the experience of diving into the Bible, finding the answers together, grappling with questions together that we might have, dealing with church trauma, because we know that's a real thing in our community. And that's kind of where we are. That's who we are. And we are open to everyone. It doesn't matter where you are on the faith spectrum. We will still welcome you. We are very much Bible-based, Jesus believers and all of that. But we also understand context and understanding the culture behind, the biblical stories. And We have people that are atheists that come because they see how much we are invested in fellowship. We have people that maybe believe that Jesus was a real person, but maybe not the divine aspect of him.
Mhm.
And they come and we grapple with those questions and
Mhm.
we don't judge each other for having those questions.
Mhm. I like that because as you're talking, I'm thinking about a particular passage, and before I get letters and emails about the passage, I'm not applying this necessarily in the marriage context, but it's making me think of the passage. I believe that it's in First Corinthians 7, where the Apostle Paul is talking about basically people coming to know God through their spouse
Hmm.
and because of their witness. And I'm hearing that same type of approach in what y'all are doing in Tennessee. That, in other words, the point is not that you have to be exactly where we're at on the journey to come, it's just come.
Yeah, exactly. The aspect of the church as a hospital, we've
Hmm.
heard that before, but I don't know where if it's the same with where you are, but down here, a lot of churches they expect you to look like them, act like them, talk
Hmm.
like them, do everything like them, be perfect, be fixed before you walk through their door,
Hmm.
or otherwise you're going to get weird looks. Some will even ask you to leave if you're not wearing what they expect you to wear.
Hmm.
What is the point of church if you're going to be like that? What is the point of Jesus if you're going to act like that to people that, I mean, what if that is their first time they've ever met somebody who exudes the light of Jesus?
Hmm.
And if you're going to sit there and judge someone who may be, we've got people that deal with addiction. We
Hmm.
have people that, alcoholism, whatever form of addiction that you've ever experienced. And I tell people, I don't care if you are on drugs currently, you can come. We're not going to judge you for who you are, where
Hmm.
you've been. We're going to be with you through that experience.
Hmm. Right. That, I guess, as you were talking, what kind of crossed my mind, and
Mhm.
this may kind of sound out there to some people, but that, first of all, why is it that church expects us to show up? I guess, like, we could say already sanctified. We are supposed to be coming to Christ because we recognize we can't do this ourselves.
Mhm.
And so I guess I don't get the mentality, and I never did. I mean, because was in we were talking before we came on air, I was in some of the most legalistic churches that ever existed. And that's not an exaggeration. But that we have this attitude, all right, if you don't come so we're comfortable with you being there, then you can't come.
Mhm.
And I guess I don't understand fundamentally the concept that if we're supposed to be coming to Christ for salvation, we really act like sanctification and everything happens all at that moment. And there are some churches that do believe that. But we kind
Yes.
of forget the point that the Bible teaches us to work out our salvation with fear and trembling.
Mhm. I think what happens is we surround ourselves in a bubble
Mm.
of people that look like us, act like us, talk like us, believe the exact same things as us. And when we have somebody that comes in that might be on a different, train than
Hmm.
that, it's almost like we feel like our bubble gets popped and our mentality is we want to protect that bubble at all costs because once your bubble gets popped then you realize that there's other ideas, there's other thoughts, there's other theological questions you might have,
Hmm.
and we oftentimes don't want to have to grapple with that. I know
Hmm.
that for me, I had to do a lot of deconstructing. A lot of us had to do that,
Hmm.
especially when you realize your sexuality or your
Hmm.
gender identity, whatever that may go against what your at the moment community tells you the Bible says about it.
Hmm.
And so I wonder if there's a fear, because fear creates can also lead to hatred, but I wonder if there is a fear of letting other people in that are different and it's going to make us have to like face face the music, face the mirror, whatever term you want to use,
Mhm.
and people are afraid of that. And so you've got the mob mentality that comes into play with big churches or churches in general
Right.
that say you have to do this exact checklist. And unfortunately, that puts them into the spot that Jesus came to say to be against, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, all this
Mhm.
legalistic stuff, saying, hey, you're actually turning into something that Jesus came and preached against.
Mhm.
And so that's my theory. I'm not
Mhm.
sure, but that's the theory
Mhm.
going.
I like what you were just saying about that. One of the reasons why I think that the mega church has become such a facet.
Mhm.
And before anybody starts, I'm not saying you can't go to one. You can go to whatever church you want. I'm not
Mhm.
going to tell anybody not to go to church. The mega church culture basically came out of revivalist culture in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you were there or if you were old enough to be there. I was there. And
I was born in '91, so
we had Brownsville, which was a really big deal to us back in the day. Then there was Toronto, which I tell people we were all really into until we found out they were all barking. Yeah, we didn't know any better. That there was Smithton, which was actually an outgrowth of Brownsville. And megachurch culture kind of became that bigger is better mentality.
Mhm.
Sometimes I wonder if the reason why that has become so prevalent somewhere within the American consciousness is because we are avoiding the intimacy of church. We are avoiding that part where, like you say, it's uncomfortable, where you have to deal with that the person who's an addict is sitting next to you because there isn't anywhere else for them to sit because there's not an auditorium to sit in. Or that we have to deal with that, yeah, maybe the person sitting next to me is queer
Yeah.
or is gay. And then you start going, well, what does that make me? Because everybody somehow thinks that's a reflection on them. And that I believe and I hope that part of what came through COVID on the other side is that we need to get back to more of that intimacy in church.
Yes. I like what you said about, like, avoiding the intimacy and, dealing with the uncomfortable and grappling with that. I've find, like I keep going back to the fact that everybody wants to isolate themselves, but you might be right. The fact that COVID, we went through such intense isolation
Mhm,
that I'm actually seeing like the opposite things. Well, not opposite, but seeing things happen because we went through such a major thing as a community.
mm,
I'm actually seeing more inclusive ministries popping up. I'm
mhm,
seeing more house churches pop up
mhm,
where people just go and have a meal and speak about the word and learn together, grow together in these small group ministries. And I'm seeing people move further and further away from these established churches. There was a friend of mine had some friends that used to go to what we don't have mega churches here, but
mhm,
we have large churches.
mhm,
And there I live right down the road from one, and they've actually had a decline in some of their attendance, and a lot of them are moving towards just going and circling, different homes throughout, trading homes each week and having dinner together and breaking bread together, talking about Jesus, doing different themes. Or, I mean, there are so many online options where you can actually have small group ministries, and it gives you
mhm,
topics to talk about. It gives you study material,
mhm,
and all of this is free. And you are able to have more, like we talked about, that intimacy, getting to know each other, walking alongside each other in whatever you're dealing with, whether that's you're going through marital issues, whether you're going through other family issues, whatever you're struggling with, you actually have more of a tight knit community. And
mhm,
we were talking, I think it was off air, where we were talking about how that was how churches initially started,
mhm.
with the apostles. You've
Right.
got house churches, and getting back to it, I've seen a theme of getting back to the roots
Mhm,
in some aspects.
mhm,
And I'm not talking necessarily like a theological root or whatever, but just going back to how things began in the
right.
Bible and kind of building off of that and saying, okay, well, this is how they did things. And honestly, it works.
Yeah.
I agree with what you said before that churches were never really meant to outgrow a certain capacity,
Mhm.
because at what point there was a study that I read that you have only the ability to remember so many names, and you can only have so many relationships before it just all becomes a blur.
Hmm.
And I think social media has unfortunately added to that problem, because I have like 4,000, 5,000, quote unquote friends on my Facebook, but I don't know
Right.
personally, all
Mhm.
of these people. And we think in this technological age that all of these people are close and good friends, but
Mhm.
that's not the case. You've got the definition of friends. You've got, who they are, maybe something about their family, where they are in their life, and you talk to them on a regular basis. At what point, in when we talk about churches, like, you can't have thousands of people attending your church and you can't call that an intimate setting, an intimate relationship that you
Right.
have with them, friendships.
Mhm.
And so I'm loving that I'm seeing more and more house churches create small group ministries, people that meet in local restaurants or coffee
Mhm.
shops every Saturday or Sunday. And I'm seeing a fire returning for, our Christian faith
Mhm.
because of that.
Right. I'm glad to hear that because I do not, particularly where I live, see as much of that. And
Mhm.
some of that is being in more of an urban area. And
Fair.
obviously, like you're talking about with social media, it's the same thing here. I don't know everybody who's in the area.
Mhm.
And Charlotte is a banking capital and a finance capital. So it's a little bit of a different theme, but I'm very excited to hear that this is becoming a thing.
Mhm.
I remember when God first kind of talked about it with me was we were still in COVID. It was kind of around the point. It was late 2020 where I think we thought we were getting out of COVID, but then it lasted longer.
Yeah. Mhm.
And we had a retreat in my house, and what we kind of did was I had sanctuary here, and I had at one point in time had a ministry that was a little bit more in alignment with what we kind of did, quote unquote, apostolically for a long time, like pretty much from about 2010 to 2020, where
Mhm.
you basically cover people and you have a network and you go to all these different things. And I remember when I came out of that weekend, the thing that God really dealt with me about was, hey, maybe we weren't apostolic enough, and
Mm.
maybe the model or the way that we were kind of moving, it wasn't deliberate, and it wasn't, like anything I kind of set out and deliberately said, all right, let's do it this way. I was just kind of doing what everybody else was doing. That
Yeah.
maybe this wasn't really the way that was going to leave an impact because things always kept winding up the same. And I never really assigned it to COVID until we're talking here now, that that is kind of part of what came out of it. One thing you mentioned earlier that I would kind of like to tap into because I think it's interesting
Mhm.
is you mentioned that you guys kind of emerged as a church because even though there were other churches there, they weren't necessarily doing what you were doing or meeting the needs that existed. And I think that church exists to meet a need. And so, in
Yeah.
your own experience, what did you find in that, or what basically have you rose to meet?
Sure. So obviously, we would want, and whether my church existed or not, we would want an affirming church, one that welcomed us regardless of who
Mhm.
we loved and how we identified. And there are churches out there that are like that. But what we found is a lot of them are focusing primarily on like family units, or
Uh huh.
the mom and dad. They're not really grappling with, they're not they're not showing up in spaces where our community is going to be.
Hmm.
Because when I first felt the call to go into ministry,
Hmm.
I fought it. I didn't feel like I could do it. I was like, I don't have the years of experience. I really was struggling with God, and God obviously put things in my path. He's like, "Well, you're going to do it whether you like it or not." Um, I mean,
That
that's
sounds like
kind of,
God.
yeah. And so yeah, I've been smacked behind, up the side of the head by God before. But
Hmm.
so saying all of that, after lots and lots of prayer, and I went through schooling and different things
Mhm.
like that, and I just kept seeing where we were lacking on the, because we kept saying we were welcoming of the LGBTQ plus community and we wanted them here, but I noticed we weren't showing up in the spaces where they were. You've got to take the ministry, you've got to take the gospel to the people.
Mhm.
And we weren't really doing that. And so after lots of prayer and a lot of struggle, God basically said, it's time. You've got to go where the people are.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of where we started, of showing up at pride events. And we don't stand with the protesters. We're actually in the pride events. We
Mhm.
will walk with people. We will have booths there with information about our church.
Mhm.
And people are just always so surprised to see us, because when they see churches, they're expecting us to be out there with the picketers and calling them names.
Mhm.
And we're here saying, hey, we love you and accept you. And not only that, we celebrate who you are.
Mhm.
And we want you to come and have a meal with us. We want you to sit with us. We want to be your friend. We're not trying to change who you are. We're here because of who you are. And they're just very surprised by that.
Mhm.
And so we cater, we like, people assume because we advertise that we're an LGBTQ plus community church, and then we say allies are welcome, they assume that all we talk about is being gay and being fairies, all that other stuff. But if you actually come in, we talk about Jesus and and Jesus's love.
Mhm.
And so that also kind of goes into the fact of, like, we're progressive Christians by label, I guess,
Mhm.
but we don't leave Jesus at the door. We don't try to kick the Bible out. We believe truly in the word of God and the power of God, the power of prayer.
Mhm.
And when people see that, they come in and they're like, "Oh, I was expecting there's going to be like a pride parade every time you have church or something." And and while we, you know, but the only the thing that we wanted to create in church is the fact I could hold my husband's hand and nobody blinks an eye.
Right.
Could talk about my life
Mhm.
and what we're doing outside of my, role as a pastor. I can actually talk about my family. I can talk
Mhm.
about the struggles that we have.
Mhm.
And especially in Tennessee, where we've had, the don't say gay bills have, tried to
Mhm.
come and go. We had the transgender bathroom bills that have tried to come. We've passed the anti-trans athletic bill that did go into effect. There was a long time where we were battling the anti-drag bills, and
Mhm.
luckily that failed. Not to say it won't come back, but
Right.
because of all of that, we have a lot of hurt in the community. And
Mhm.
so we're trying to help people heal. We're trying to show that not all Christians are going to thump you over the head with the Bible. You can actually be LGBT and you can have a Christian identity.
Mhm.
Like, those two are not oxymorons, that they can actually coexist beautifully together.
Right.
And so asking, kind of what need wasn't being met, it was so much
Mhm.
that I can't be angry at those churches, because they had a need that they had to fulfill too.
Right.
And God put it on my heart, another need that was not being met. And so somebody else might see another need and they'll
Mhm.
create a ministry to fulfill that need. And we're trying to also go beyond just being a queer church. We also care about those that are underserved in our community. We
Mhm.
have a very high homeless population. We have a very high drug addicted population.
Mhm.
And so we're doing things like, we partnered with the Carter County Drug Prevention Center, and they actually cater to addiction recovery in our
Mhm.
area. And we're even, my associate pastor is part of Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, which some
Mhm.
people associate with, you know who they are, so
Yep.
kind of a drag-esque sort of thing. They do nonprofit work,
Right.
and they do a lot of give backs, fight against gun violence before.
Mhm.
They have done different things where they've raised money for the local Pride Community Center. I mean,
Mhm.
they are such a great group. And we as a church are connected to all of these wonderful groups. And that, to me, is showing where Jesus and, God is permeated throughout our experiences, because we're able to reach people in places that churches would never want to go to.
Right.
And I remember when I first, so if you don't know this about me, I used to be Catholic, then left the church and became more of agnostic atheist before I came back to Christianity in
Mhm,
general. And when the first church I went back to was not affirming. Me and my husband were married at that time. They weren't affirming.
mhm,
And when I wanted to get baptized, the pastor said that we could never be members because we were gay or
mhm,
married to each other. And I remember saying this to him, that I would be able to reach people. I would be able to share the gospel with people that he would never be able to talk to, that
mhm,
he would never be able to reach. And that's kind of stuck with me of, I want to go to places that most people who share the gospel would never want to go to.
mhm,
I want to meet people where they are, whether they haven't had a shower in a month. I want to be able to talk to these people that are experiencing struggles, because I am called to serve,
mhm,
and that's what our church is supposed to do.
mhm.
And so those are the needs that we're trying to meet in a long summarized version. There's a lot of different needs,
Mhm.
but specific to outreach to the queer population, that's kind of our main objective.
I like a couple things that you said that I kind of want to expand on. The first one
Sure.
was that I really like that, first of all, what you said had no judgment in it. One of the things I am noting, and I am probably going to do something for it on my Pathos column, is that it's very easy to be a critic these days.
Hmm.
It's very easy. And what happened was I was doing research for something and I wound up on this whole thing on TikTok. And I actually wound up spending a couple of hours of my life that I won't get back watching
TikTok.
a couple, I'm not going to mention their names, that literally just tear apart everything that they don't agree with in Christianity.
Yeah.
And they are Christian themselves. So I think that that's kind of important to stick in there. And the specific thing I was watching on, because I was preparing a column about what happened in Hillsong Church, I was watching stuff that they were talking about the Brownsville revival, which we mentioned earlier. And I'm
Hmm.
sitting there going, you're not a pastor, you've never been a pastor. You don't have any idea what it was like to lead something of that magnitude.
Yeah.
I don't have any idea what it was like to lead something of that magnitude. And it's really easy to sit back and read a book of a critic of it or who left the church because they didn't like the leadership. It's easy to sit back and have a bunch of opinions when you've never even done this on a small scale, let alone a big one.
Yeah.
And I think it's really easy to be a critic nowadays because we have the internet and people think, hey, they know all the inside dirt because people are voyeuristic and
Yeah.
that's the universal kink, and they like the idea that they're kind of got an inside scoop and they're going to sit there and just decimate the work that other people did. And I really do appreciate that you said that, they're meeting a need that they recognized, and maybe this
Mhm.
wasn't for them to do. This is what we're going to do. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a really admirable perspective. I think that that's a really good way to look at things because anybody can sit back and be critical of the whole world.
Mhm.
You know what? Everybody has their issues, everybody has their limitations. And I've even said, like, we cannot hold people to the standards of past generations now. You know, they
Mhm.
lived in a different time, they had different ethics, different morals. It was different. We can't compare the two. So I think that that's really admirable. You were talking about your own call and that God, just kind of like, yeah, you're going to do it anyway thing. And I love
Mhm.
God in that vein because God's just like, we're going, no, God, I'm not. And God's like, yeah, yeah, whatever. And talk a little bit more about your call. And the reason I say that is because I think that there are so many reasons why we kick and scream as we go into
Yeah.
this. And we're always telling God why God can't or shouldn't use us when God already knows that about us. And I think that that would really speak to a lot of people,
Mhm.
about your own story and your own call and, how you kind of got into this.
It's kind of a long story, but that's what this is for, right?
Yeah, right.
Um,
I got time.
so you got time.
I got
So I'll start in the beginning, I guess. So my parents really didn't raise us to be very religious.
Mhm,
So that I felt was kind of being you not necessarily used against me, but was kind of an obstacle that I had to deal with
mhm.
because I was not really raised in a church. My father was a Baptist, my mother was a Catholic. Neither one wanted us to be the other, so we kind of weren't anything.
So you didn't go to Catholic school like I did.
Not in the beginning. So it wasn't until after my parents divorced that my mom finally started integrating us into her Catholic faith. And so I was about 10 when I was baptized and we started going to CCD classes, which I don't even remember what CCD stands for, but
Confraternity of Christian Doctrine.
oh, wow. Okay, there you go. Are you Catholic? No.
I was until I was 17. So yes.
Okay, okay, fair. And so we had to go through all of that. And, you got your first communion classes you had to go to. And then we actually, around when I was around the same age, I was put into the private Catholic school that was there, me and my younger brother. And just, it really, I enjoyed it. I also loved the fact that, because before I was bullied. And so going into this Catholic school, they had a very harsh bullying policy. Not harsh, but good bullying
Mhm,
policy. And so I didn't have to deal with that. So I was able to kind of have a sense of safety network. I was an odd child, but
mhm.
who wasn't at that age?
Same. Yeah.
Right. I didn't really know how to relate to my peers, but I really enjoyed our religion studies class, and it dealt with a lot of questions about, the Bible and things that I had never really grown up with. And while I didn't really understand the true impact of it, I think that that gave me a jumping off point to actually love religion, or
Mm,
at least love aspects of it. And then when I went to high school is when I came out of, a private school setting and went into a public school setting. I saw way more diversity than I'd ever seen in my life,
mm,
and different people, different perspectives. And I had kind of fallen out of really enjoying going to church. It was more of a chore than actual enjoyment. And I was bored out of my mind during mass. So and I didn't really understand all the sacraments or understand why they were important. I mean, I understood aspects of it, but it was just I didn't feel connected to it all. And so when I eventually came out around 19, I really just I saw the negativity of Christians as in general
mm,
towards my community, and I said, "You know what? If this is God's people, I don't want any part of that
mhm,
because of the hate." I mean, it was pretty bad
mhm,
that I saw and witnessed. And so I kind of just stepped away entirely from it and really was just agnostic, kind of borderline atheist. And then I met my now husband when we were that actually I was 19. We've been together since we were 19, and so we kind of met at a pivotal time of when I was kind of like against religion, and he was raised pretty I want to non-denominational Baptist kind
mhm.
of area, and so he's always held strongly to his faith, even though his family is not okay with the whole gay thing, and so he's been very much strong and adamant about his faith. And so that was like one of the biggest arguments in our early marriage and relationship was my stance on I don't want anything to do with Christianity. And he is like, I don't know how this is this is going to go
Mhm.
down. And so it wasn't until I was about 25, I think. We got married when we were 21. So several years later,
Mhm.
that I was challenged. I'm a huge book nerd. I love to read. I love to read just about anything. And a friend of mine at the time said, if you're going to hate something, you need to at least read the book that it's about before you sit there and say you hate it.
Aha.
And so part of being Catholic is you don't really read the Bible that much.
Right.
That's kind of the old school Catholicism. I don't
Mhm.
know new school maybe.
It's still not really much of a thing.
Okay, well
From what
fair.
I understand, I mean, there are people that do read it, but it's not the same as like the Protestant understanding of
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, like we Protestants push heavily to read the word as an
Right.
independent person. And in Catholicism, or at least how I grew up, you kind of relied more on your lectionary readings
Right.
through the year. So, anyway, I had never read the Bible. I had read bits and pieces. I knew about, the coat of many colors. I knew about Noah,
Mhm.
but other than that, I really didn't know a whole lot. And so I was like, fine, I'll give it a go, because my thought process was, if I read the Bible and I can use it if people try to attack me, I'll be like, oh, ho, ho, this is what this says about that. And that was kind of my mentality. And so I was like, fine, I'll read it. And it took me a while to find a translation that I could actually understand, because King James was not it.
Mhm.
And so I ended up reading the New Living Translation,
Uh-huh.
and I read it cover to cover. And about maybe halfway through, I was like, uh-oh, this might be something. And I am not one of those people, or I used to not be one of those people. I had to have actual extra biblical evidence
Mhm.
for the Bible. I couldn't just say, okay, well, this book that's over 2,000 years old is telling me something. I need other evidence besides this. And so I really dug into looking up, you know, archaeological evidence, Josephus, different things like that. I wanted evidence that Jesus actually existed, and that some of the historical evidence of the Bible that actually happened. And I found overwhelming evidence that I was like, "Oh crap. this is this is something." And so finally, I, came to my friend and I was like, "Hey, I need you to mentor me in this. We can have Bible study on a weekly basis." And so we
Mhm.
did that for like a year before I went and got baptized again, because, well, you know, I got baptized at 10 years old, didn't really understand it. And so I got
Mhm.
baptized at that time. And it was like a whole new world for me. I was really falling in love with
Mhm.
my new faith. And then I had a crisis of faith because of the pastor that I mentioned telling me I couldn't be a member of their church because of who I loved. And I was like, I felt like I was being pushed back to square one again,
Mhm.
where I was seeing that hate of Christianity, but I had kind of grappled with the concept of the people are not God.
Mhm.
So I cannot always say that because of how these people are acting, I have to be against God. And I kind of turned it to where I'm not going to let these people take God from me.
Mhm.
And so I ended up finding a local affirming church whose the pastor was gay, and it was more of a Pentecostal
Mhm.
vibe. And me and my husband, at first they scared the bejesus out of me. Um, the the dancing and the yelling and the
Mhm.
running chairs sometimes, and I was just like, these people are crazy. and but I something said keep going back, so I did, and really fell in love. That honestly was the church that helped me really truly fall in love with the Bible and experiencing my faith and the different it was the foundation of my faith. And over time, different needs, God calls you to do different things, and I ended up going into their Bible school that they
Mhm.
have for people to help people become pastors, and ended up getting some ministry license through them. And then during all of this, God kept before I went into their Bible college, I was hesitant because I kept feeling like God wanted me to do more, that God wanted me to become a minister of sorts. And I was like, why? Why do you want me to do this? I found this church. Isn't that enough?
Right.
And it just kept feeling like, I kept being in prayer, and God just kept pushing, saying, you need to do more. You need to go into some sort of pastoral ministry. And so I ended up reaching out to the senior pastor there and say, hey, this is going to sound weird, but
Mhm.
do you have any suggestions about anybody that's interested in becoming a pastor? And he said, funny you ask. We're actually working on a Bible school for people to go through to become pastors in our church and open up churches of their own maybe one day. And so I said, "Okay, well, sign me up, I guess,"
Mhm.
because this call is not going away, and it's kind of frustrating. And so,
Uh,
it's like
yeah.
an itch you can't scratch kind of thing. And so I jumped into it and loved it, and I love the Old Testament. I love the Hebrew. I
Mhm.
love the culture and just all of it. And so I was able to really get into it. And then over time, God put another call on me saying, "Okay, it's time." And I'm like, "What do you mean it's time?" And it was me and my associate pastor and my husband, and it was a lot of we did a lot of prayer and a lot of seeking God on this and a lot of fighting back on God on this.
Mhm.
And it was the month of June, which is Pride Month, and
Mhm.
it was a decision finally we made that okay, it's time to step out on our own. And not sure how this is going to happen. We're going to let God lead this because there's literally no other way we're going to do it. And we
Mhm.
just kind of started as a grassroots of just okay, well, we're just going to post on social media.
Mhm.
And we had such an outpouring of love and support that it kept growing and growing. And finally we got to a place. Somebody out of the blue said, "Hey, I heard you're looking for a place to meet. Why don't you use our community center for free,
Mhm.
and we'll let you use this space, and we want to support you in whatever you need." And so that became an option. And it just we showed up at the Rainbow Festival this past year, and a few other people came, and it's just been, we're still small, but it's
Mhm.
just, we're seeing, like, every time we do an outreach event, like we're planning a Fall Fest event where we're going to be at the Tri Pride event at the end of this month. At the time of recording, it's September. So
Mhm. Right.
at the end of the month, we're going to have Pride. We're going to have a booth there. We are connected with all of these communities, and it's really a beautiful thing that God has done
Mhm.
because I can see, like, we have not done anything. Like,
Mhm.
yes, we basically, help keep the ship, above water, but other than that, God's driving. And it's been a journey, and it's only been maybe a year and a
Mhm.
half, 2 years start to finish, something like that.
Mhm.
And we just started meeting in person in February of this year.
Mhm.
And so we're still very young as a
Mhm.
church, but I can definitely see things moving, and I'm looking forward to, more things to come. That I feel like God is brewing some more stuff that even we're not ready for.
Mhm. God always has his reasons. He always
Yeah.
has his purposes, even though we don't get them.
Hmm.
And even though I love your honesty because it's like you're saying, even though you're still in this, you're still like, oh God, you got to be kidding.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and that makes me feel better because I don't know how to tell you this. That does not go away.
Oh yeah.
No, it doesn't. In fact, it gets worse. The longer you're in this, you're like, oh God, come on. I just did this last thing. You really expect me to do this now too?
Yeah.
It definitely is a thing. And I think that it sounds like what you're doing is wonderful to integrate community and that it really comes out of a place of experience of need
Hmm.
and that you firsthand know that this was absolutely not your idea.
Yep.
And we don't give enough credibility for that. I think that people think when they're not called, they really don't understand that, look, really, this was not our idea. I keep telling you, this really was not
Yeah.
our idea. For real, it wasn't. What do you guys have? I know you have your immediate event plan. What do you foresee in terms of everything we've been talking about on here, in terms of community and really kind of creating that social aspect as well as the spiritual? What do
Hmm.
you see as you guys continue to grow are going to be things that you're going to kind of grow into as you do that? Like, what do you foresee you guys doing long term? And if your answer is you have no idea, that's fine. Because I mean, I'm
A little
telling you
bit.
this right now. Some days people go, "Oh well, what are you going to do the rest of your life?" I said, "Look, dude, I don't know what I'm going to do this morning." Okay,
Right.
so I mean, totally. If you don't have a plan, I mean, that's also faith. But do you
Mhm.
guys have like something that God has really put on your heart for you to do that you're working toward?
So yes and no. So part of it is we're just holding on for dear life. The other part is
Fair, fair.
that right. The other part is we want to be more service oriented. So in our area, homelessness, like I mentioned, is a huge issue,
Mhm,
and the LGBTQ plus community actually makes up a very large percentage of that. And we have discussed doing things more for the local community, the underserved community, like doing more food pantries, doing going to I can't think of the melting pot, I think is the name of it. Either
mhm,
way, it's a place where the homeless can go to get meals, like hot meals served to them. Showing up in our, whether we're wearing a church shirt or not, just showing up where these people are and serving them, not with any expectation, but just being there and serving them and helping take care of them, coat drives, different things like that. We are wanting to be more present in the community in general.
mhm,
Obviously, we have Tri Pride coming up. We also are going to be doing, like, the fall festival. We're also planning to do a Christmas ornament decoration event so
mhm,
that so we're trying to also be inviting to people that are afraid of church, that they can come to events that aren't really churchy,
mhm.
that they can get to know us as people outside of any other title or capacity that we have.
Right.
So we don't have any like huge plans. Our main thing is we're letting God do this thing because we have no idea. We're just kind of here for the journey.
Right.
But we do have things that we want to do. And we're very service oriented for our church, service and outreach. And those are the two main things that we try to prioritize. And I think that as we get more settled in, our location, and as more people come, we're going to be able to do more and more things. But definitely reaching out, homeless community is something, and addiction community are things that we're really focused on, and
Mhm,
doing things to serve them.
mhm. And definitely needed. Personally, I have not used, but as I tell people, codependents are addicts too.
Yeah.
And we're addicted to the addict. And I have spent many years in 12 step and in recovery from that.
Mhm.
And I don't feel that there is enough church outreach to the addicted community.
Mhm.
I know homelessness is a problem in Charlotte. Part of that is political red tape. I'm not going to get into all those ins and
Sure,
outs,
yeah.
but they make it very, very difficult for anybody to do anything.
Mhm.
And that's because, everybody wants to act like there isn't a problem, but that's part of urban living in a lot of ways. And a lot of times, as you're saying, homelessness and addiction go together, that they are
Yeah.
not
Mhm.
necessarily polar opposites. I mean, it doesn't mean somebody's an addict if they're homeless, but the two
Mhm.
do tend to kind of go together as a community. And I think
Yeah.
it's very, very admirable to be looking out over this and say, hey, I want to do this, and we want people to meet us as us. When I first was rising up in ministry 25 years ago, and then I accepted my own call around 2007, somewhere between 2005 and 2007.
Mhm.
We were very much into the honorifics. And I think that there's a place for that. I think that I'm not anti title. I know that some people are. I
Sure.
think that there is a place for the honorifics and to honor the work that God is doing in our lives that is a gift to the body. I do believe in that. But I also know that somewhere in there, I forgot who Leanne was.
Yeah.
And I wound up very disconnected from that. And that there is a place for the honorific, but there is also a place to just be who we are and to let people see that as well. And I think that when we are dealing with community, that that's really, really important
Mhm.
because we can get so into the work that we forget that God called us to the work. And what I mean by that is the work is us, but the work is at the same time an extension of us. God called us before the foundation of the world and gifted us for it.
Yes.
So when we are doing things, it is important that people see us as we are. Like you talk about, being honest that, maybe you're not the most socially comfortable person all the time.
Yeah.
Me admitting that I'm not 90% of the time. And we talk about things like you really liked to study stuff and you really love religion and you love it by itself, as an idea, as a concept, and
Yeah.
that you love being and interacting with people, and hey, we can make really bad looking ornaments, and hey, we can, or that's how mine would look, or hey, we
Mhm,
can be really, really skilled here and hand out blankets, or hey, we can do these different things, and I can be here for you because I'm a person and I know what it's like
mhm.
to struggle. That we tend to forget that when we get into this work. And I think that the fact that you want to do that is very, very integrating in community and really does open the door for people to be interested. Having an atheist in a church to somebody else may cause doubt, and that's why they don't want them there. And they think that assurance is key. Well, help my unbelief is in the Bible.
Mhm.
So maybe sometimes we need to hear their doubts for our
Yeah.
own sake. Maybe we need to have that conversation, not just to convince them, because that's what it becomes about. Not to convince them, but to look at our own life and to look at what we need to
Yes,
convince in ourselves.
introspection. Yeah. I think oftentimes, like we said, there's, that fear of having to look within,
Hmm.
and nobody wants to do that. There's a reason we have so many distractions in our day-to-day life, like social media. We've got cell phones in our hands, computers, TVs, all the electronics, because nobody wants to sit there to their own thoughts.
Yes, how
And
dare we?
right? And I think you struck a point of, like, with people that have different beliefs than you, it's not about conversion. It's about you being secure enough in your own faith for that to not affect you negatively. I
Hmm.
always say can take your doubts. God can handle your anger. God can handle anything because he created you. So he knows what you're going to do, what you're going to say before you even say it. And so we have this, especially those that are brought up in the more, I guess, conservative side of faith, that if you are asking these questions of God, that somehow your faith is lacking. But I think that it's the opposite. I think that we have faith enough to know that God can take it, that God is still going to be there regardless of the questions we're asking. And that's kind of how I approach it. Like my church, I don't expect them to believe everything that I believe. During our lessons, I call them lessons versus, because I'm not really preaching at anybody. I'm just
Hmm.
presenting some information and we're going to discuss it. And even in the middle of it, I'll say, I'm not expecting you to always agree with me.
Hmm.
This is not the space that I expect that in. I do hope that I lead you to, some answers or help you find the answers. That is my job as a shepherd, is to care for them and care
Hmm.
for the needs and where they are. My job is to meet them where they are. And so I may have certain belief systems that they don't have, and that's
Hmm.
okay. I am more on the Hebraic side of my faith. I came out of a church that was Hebraic slash kind of going more messianic,
Hmm.
so I have that as a foundation. And so they're not always going to want to celebrate, the feasts in the Bible or
Right.
whatever. And so I'm not trying to push all that on them. And
Hmm.
so I try to always meet people where they are. And we have people that are, like I said, on the atheist spectrum. And I think people are more likely to come to your church or come to your group knowing that they're not going to be forced or expected to, quote unquote, convert to the doctrine of the
Hmm.
church, that there is a no judgment zone kind of mentality.
Right.
I think that you're going to have a much better chance at reaching people and building relationships if you approach things that way.
Hmm. And that's very wise. That's very wise because people don't like to be talked at.
Mhm.
As a neurodivergent myself, I have often said that I don't know if everybody has that experience, but I tend to feel people talk at me.
Yeah.
And It's not a good feeling.
Hmm.
And I think that we tend to do that in religion because I say basically evangelicalism goes on the premise of self evidence, that they feel that what they believe is obvious. So you don't believe it. So you're not seeing it. So they're going to keep repeating it until you see it, kind of thing.
Bash you over the head until.
That, right. It's like, what's the matter with you? You don't get this. You need to see what I'm seeing. Instead of understanding, like you're saying, that even in the early centuries of Christianity, even in
Mhm.
the first days of the book of Acts, it's like I tell people, the book of Acts was not all that was going on. And there were different schools. Some were more Hebraic, some were more Greek,
Yeah.
some worked with different communities. I always tell people, they make the joke about there being no white people in the Bible. Actually, the Galatians were Celtics. So there are white people in the Bible, but that's different from it being a white narrative. But
Yeah.
obviously, they had a different view than maybe somebody who was organically Hebraic. There's
Mhm.
a lot of different perspectives that we don't take into account. And if we don't study scripture, like you're saying, from that perspective, we don't see them all.
Exactly.
And that's why Bible study is so much more, like we say, than Bible therapy. It's not just
Mhm.
y'all sit around and kind of talk about your feelings about the Bible. We give thoughts, we give information, we hear what people say, we hear what people think. And somewhere in there, we walk away with a better understanding for that.
Absolutely. Like the Bible is, in my opinion, a living, almost like a living organism of sorts, because you are always going to get something out of it, no matter how you approach it, or how many
Right.
times you've read through it. And it's an experience. And so it's trying to sit there and say that you're just, whatever I believe is, we talked about evangelically, the
Hmm.
self-evidence thing. Whatever the experience I've had is, there's pastors that, because they feel a type of way with something, then that must be doctrine. That must be biblical, rather than, maybe looking up and, and finding evidence in the Bible to withstand it. It tends to be my interpretation is the right way, my interpretation or the highway. And I just, that tends to go against the my every sense of values, I guess, because yes, I feel very strongly in my interpretation and my views, but to say that I must force that upon another person, I just can't see Jesus doing that. He came for the people that were, ostracized from the society. You've got, he went and had meals with them, and they were from people from different variety of backgrounds, that the rest of the society said, you know what, we don't like them, we want to cast them out. And I see that reflected in the church. I feel like I'm going on a tangent here, but
No,
I
you're
see that,
fine.
I see that reflected in the church, of the church is now, becoming that Pharisee Sadducee depiction in the Bible of, these people we don't want anything to do with. We don't
Hmm.
want to, they're lepers. We we don't want
Right.
anything to do with them. And Jesus would be going and and reaching out to these communities. I fully believe that Jesus would be partying with a drag queen. He
Hmm.
would be going and, hanging out with the people that the churches otherwise want nothing to do with. And
Hmm.
so I see that in saying that, people are going to experience the Bible, experience faith in a variety of different ways, but I'm never going to expect that to be the same for every person.
Hmm. Yes. I just did a thing on the Pharisees and the Sadducees. That made me smile. I put it up on my TikTok. Somebody
I'm gonna
asked about it, and I just did a whole thing on that on TikTok.
Oh no. TikTok will take your life away. You'll
Tell me
be like,
about
what do
it.
you mean it's been an hour? What?
Tell me about it. You never think that things under 10 minutes would take your whole life.
Multiple 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, I mean, most of the stuff I do is way under that, but it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, pretty much it does. Anyway, we are pretty much at the end of our episode. And I would like to ask you, which I do turn it over to the guests, something that maybe you'd like to say to leave with the listeners, kind of like a final thought.
I guess my final thought would just be, whether you're a pastor or somebody that's just a member or somebody that is in leadership or across the spectrum, never had anything to do with religion, I would say try to set aside your own preconceived notions when you're meeting people. Try to build relationships and have meals with people and get into a space of being able to be more tolerant of differences and not try to change people to meet your own personal notions. Everybody's going to have different values, and it's important for us as people that serve in, especially in a Christian capacity, that we need to see God in them and stop trying to change people to fit the mold that we want. So yeah, there you go.
Sounds good to me. Absolutely. How can everybody get in contact with you if they would like to?
Sure. So you can always send me an email, Rev Alex Birchnell at ChristRedemptionChurch.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram, ChristRedemptionChurch.com, and that's Christ's Possessive.
Mhm.
And we are going to be, you'll be able to see us in person at the end of the month on September 23rd. We will be at Tri Pride in Johnson City, Tennessee. We will have a booth there so you can come and talk to us and ask any questions you might have from us. Take one of our business cards, and we meet every Saturday at 7. We do not publicize our address just for safety reasons in
Mhm.
this area, but if you would like, just message us on Facebook and we'll get back to you.
Absolutely. Sounds wonderful. Well, I thank you very much for being on here today and would love for you to come back at some point in time if you would be interested, because I think
Absolutely.
that this is definitely a conversation that needs to be continued.
Absolutely. I'd love to.
Well, that sounds good to me. And I thank you all for listening too, because we could not do this without you. And if you are interested in a resource that can help answer questions, because we've talked a lot about discussion on here today, I recommend my book, Just Between Us Christians: Real Answers to Real Questions, submitted by real Christians. Do not try saying that 5 times fast. I don't even know if I'm going to say it a second time, even though I typically do. But those are actually compilations of questions I have been asked over the years that people really did submit for this book. And so these are sincere questions about life, about relationships, about LGBTQ plus inclusion, and more. So you want to get a copy of my book, Just Between Us Christians: Real Answers to Real Questions, submitted by real Christians. It is available in paperback and ebook format. Look me up on Amazon or wherever books are sold, Dr. Leanne B. Marino, and all of my 35 titles will come up. Something there for everybody. Look there for something that interests you. Also, look me up on social media at Kingdom Power Now, whether on TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever it is they're calling it now. I forgot. No, ain't nobody calling it that, so I ain't gonna worry about that. Instagram and beyond at Kingdom Power Now. You can look me up. Let's have a conversation. Let's have a discussion. I would love to have you add me on there. If you'd like to learn more about the world of counterculture Christianity, feel free to visit my website at kingdompowernow.org. That's kingdompowernow.org. If you are interested in seminary that can be done from home, that is entirely affordable, and that is community based, that meets the needs that you have in order to practically execute ministry in modern times, check out Apostolic University Seminary at apostolicuniversity.org. That's apostolicuniversity.org. Also, if you're in the Charlotte, North Carolina area and you are looking for no favoritism, just family, where we are there to be and to meet the needs of the community that you have, feel free to check out Sanctuary at welcomeinthisplace.org. That's welcomeinthisplace.org. And as the website is currently undergoing revision, if you have a question that is not answered on site, feel free to reach out to any one of us who are listed there, and we will be more than happy to answer your question. And this is Apostle Dr. Leanne Marino reminding you in closing that community is an essential part of our faith. And that sometimes, in order to find community, we have to recognize that the world is bigger than just us. So get out there today and interact with the greater world so that your community can expand. Until next time, be blessed. Thank you for joining us on Kingdom Now. I pray it proves to be a blessing in your life. To learn more about this work, ask a question, submit feedback or a topic suggestion, advertise on air, or donate to this work, Visit my website, which contains essential information and links for other points of contact around the web at kingdompowernow.org. Also, if you are in our area and would like to visit Sanctuary International Fellowship Tabernacle SIFT, visit welcomeinThisPlace.org. Until next time, this is Apostle Dr. Leanne Marino reminding you that the kingdom of God is within you, and that means the kingdom is now.